Okay, let's dive deep. We're plunging headfirst into the vast, mysterious ocean today. I mean, it's a place that has captured human imagination for basically as long as we've stared out at the horizon, right? Spinning legends and hiding enduring truths beneath its waves.
Absolutely, think about it. From ancient mariners navigating by the stars and, sheer courage, pushing the boundaries of the known world in these fragile wooden vessels,
Right.
to modern sailors charting waters that still hold secret science is only just starting to uncover. The sea is just absolutely packed with stories.
And not all of them are easy to explain, that's for sure.
No, definitely not. What's truly fascinating is how consistent some of those stories are across vast stretches of time and different cultures. They often echo similar themes, the wonder of discovery, the stark reality of danger, and that profound encounter with the unknown.
It really suggests something fundamental about our relationship with this immense, powerful environment, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Absolutely. And you, the listener, have given us a truly extraordinary stack of sources to explore this relationship today. We're looking at, well, everything from documented world-famous historical accounts of mutiny and survival on the high seas to ancient, fantastical tales of mythical voyages, right up to contemporary online discussions where people are sharing startling personal encounters beneath the waves right now.
It's quite a mix, a collection that spans fact, folklore, and modern mystery.
It really is. It offers us a chance to look at humanity's interaction with the maritime world through incredibly different lenses. The deeply personal, sometimes unsettling anecdotal experiences being reported today.
Yeah, those are really something.
The documented brutal realities of historical events and the rich imaginative landscapes of ancient myths and legends that have shaped our understanding of the sea for, well, millennia.
So our mission for this deep dive is ambitious but clear. We're going to immerse ourselves in these varied accounts, extract the most compelling, sometimes disturbing details, and explore what they reveal about our enduring, often complex relationship with the sea, and specifically the profound unknown that lies beneath its surface.
Get ready for a journey into myth, mutiny, and deeply mysterious encounters.
It's a journey that takes us from the hushed, sometimes fearful whispers shared in online forums to the stark, documented struggle for survival against both nature and human nature.
Right.
And finally, to the grand, imaginative, and sometimes terrifying landscapes of ancient literature where, the impossible is real.
And speaking of those whispers, let's start with perhaps the most immediate and, frankly, startling of the sources. A recent online discussion thread you shared. This is from Reddit, specifically a thread where someone posed the question, maybe expecting fantasy, but receiving something far more visceral. Legit mermaid stories or encounters.
Yes, the premise is simple enough. People responding by sharing what they describe as intensely personal, often very startling, experiences they believe involved mermaids, sirens, or, similar aquatic beings. These aren't just retellings of folklore, they are presented as direct, felt encounters.
And what immediately grabs your attention reading through this thread is the sheer geographical spread of these reports. It's not confined to a single haunted coastline or some well-known legendary spot.
Not at all.
We see contributors mentioning locations all over the map, the Caribbean, with specific callouts to Jamaica, Utila, Honduras, and the Bahamas. Someone talks about experiences in Texas, the Gulf of Mexico, California, Georgia, North Carolina.
And even places as far-flung as Crete, Greece, and the Philippines.
Yeah, exactly. This isn't just one isolated local legend. People are reporting these kinds of encounters from incredibly diverse coastal and, interestingly, even some freshwater locations.
That geographical spread is profoundly significant, isn't it? It prompts us to consider the possibilities. Are these reports tapping into widespread human psychological phenomena related to the powerful effect the sea has on us?
Yeah.
Or, as many commenters in the thread themselves suggest, could it point to a phenomenon that isn't confined to a single region, perhaps indicating a widespread species, or, as they speculate, some form of non-human intelligence?
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more, looking across the diverse accounts shared in the thread. Several key themes and, well, unsettling patterns start to emerge, threads that connect these disparate stories.
Right.
The first one is this recurring motif of a powerful, often overwhelming and sometimes described as hypnotic urge to enter the water, or maybe to go deeper than the person intended or felt safe doing.
Yes, the source provides compelling examples of this. We see it mentioned in the story from Montego Bay, the encounter in Rockport, Texas, a specific account from someone on a cruise ship,
Oh yeah, that one.
a terrifying report from a North Carolina river, a story from the Bahamas, and another from a California beach. It's consistently described as feeling called or being in a trance, feeling drawn in a way that is intensely difficult, sometimes seemingly impossible to resist, almost against your rational will.
Like in that Rockport, Texas story.
Yeah.
The person was just waiting at a quiet, hidden beach, felt this intense urge to swim far out, felt something distinctly calling them deeper.
Mm-hmm.
They describe wanting so badly to follow that urge, to swim out to where the calling was strongest, even though their rational mind, their gut instinct, was screaming pure danger. The draw was almost overwhelming.
And this directly leads to the second strong and often contradictory theme, the sense of danger. While one account, the cruiser who felt compelled to jump overboard, reported an initial overwhelming feeling of peace associated with the urge.
Which is strange in itself.
Very strange. But the predominant feeling reported across most of the other stories is one of profound dread, immediate danger, and sometimes described explicitly as feeling evil linked to this compulsion to enter or go deeper into the water.
Right. Why this duality? Is the peace part of the lure, maybe? A deception to draw you in, with the danger being the underlying reality of the encounter.
That's a chilling thought.
The cruiser, who felt that unsettling peace, still had to physically fight against their own body, which was slowly, seemingly on its own, moving towards the edge of the ship against their conscious will.
It certainly raises an important and chilling question about the nature of these potential encounters. If they are real, are they uniformly benevolent or malevolent? Or could there, as some of the more speculative commenters in the thread hypothesize, be different types of aquatic beings with different intentions?
Some may be benign or simply indifferent, others predatory and dangerous.
Possibly. That's what some people seem to think.
Moving beyond the feelings and compulsions, let's look at the descriptions people give of the beings themselves. They are varied, certainly not a single template, but there are some fascinating common threads and striking differences.
Indeed. We hear about a big black figure with long hair from that Montego Bay lightning story.
Yeah, that was creepy.
The Rockport, Texas account, where they saw two heads pop up, describes them as looking human, specifically mentioning saw their brown hair, outline of their faces. But the key detail was they swam like dolphin fish while looking human.
That combination of human appearance with non-human locomotion is significant, isn't it?
Very. Then there's a disturbing dream encounter description that felt intensely real to the person, describing a pale, long, flat-haired fishman's body and bluish-silver tail.
Wow.
Someone in Georgia talks about a sighting they believe was a mermaid with slick, dark hair, the tail, the gray, pale skin, associating it with a dark, deep part of a lake.
A lake,
Yeah.
not the ocean.
A lake, yeah. And the Flatbridge, Jamaica sighting, corroborated by multiple commenters, mentions a woman seen resting beside a stone whose hair was red but her skin was very dark, described specifically as a fishy type of woman with very dark eyes and having a brown tail.
Red hair, dark skin, brown tail. Very specific.
Another account from Crete, Greece, also describes a more traditional image. A human-like person, he had long hair and a fish-like tail, sitting on a rock.
That Crete description sounds the most like the classic mermaid from fairy tales, human upper body, fishtail. But then you have accounts that defy this, like the one from the fisherman's uncle in the Atlantic Sea back in the 60s.
Right, he saw a very large fishtail, but the being also clearly had hands, a head, etc. Not just a tail, but definite limbs and a head attached to a large fish-like body.
So the variation is absolutely key here. It's not one single consistent description across all accounts, which is often what people expect from cryptid or, unknown phenomena reports.
Exactly. Tails are mentioned, but also legs, like in those fascinating Orang-Utan accounts we'll get to. Skin color varies black, pale, gray, very dark. Hair color varies black, brown, red, even purple in one childhood sighting mentioned. The overall form isn't uniform.
Which suggests either different types of reported beings or maybe highly subjective perception under stressful or unusual circumstances.
Both are possibilities, absolutely. Another interesting, almost eerie pattern is how these beings seem to appear out of nowhere and disappear just as quickly, adding to the profound mystery.
The Rockport, Texas sighting is a great example. They just popped up seemingly from nothing and then vanished instantaneously after the person resisted the urge to swim out.
That sudden appearance and disappearance makes them incredibly elusive and, well, hard to explain by conventional means.
And within the thread itself, the commenters aren't limited to just reporting sightings. They're actively trying to interpret them. There are a whole range of other interpretations offered, some drawing on folklore, others on more contemporary speculation.
Right, some suggest mermaids are demonic or represent spiritual wickedness, tying them into religious or supernatural frameworks.
Others propose the idea of fallen angel offspring, connecting it to biblical concepts of beings interacting with humanity. There's speculation linking these sightings to recent, broader discussions about revelations about non-human intelligence existing beneath large water bodies.
Suggesting these could be intelligent non-human species already present on Earth. Or that mermaids could be aliens, or specifically a species of alien that resides in our oceans.
It's wild speculation, but it shows how people are trying to make sense of it.
One commenter gets quite detailed, suggesting there are broadly agreeable and disagreeable nature aquatic beings, including specific types like Ogod's nomos, which they describe vividly as ugly water creatures with webbed feet hands, bulgy eyes, and fish mouths. They speculate on different types or tribes and even the possibility of interbreeding.
It's fascinating how people immediately try to fit these strange, unexplainable experiences into frameworks they understand, from the spiritual and religious to the extraterrestrial, cryptozoological, even these sort of racialized descriptions of different types.
Of course, sprinkled throughout the thread, as with any online discussion of the unexplained, is the tension between those who share their deeply felt experiences and those who are deeply, sometimes aggressively, skeptical.
Yeah, you see comments like, fake oh Mao, this never happened, or even accusations like gaslight me from those sharing their stories.
But it's particularly notable and supportive that some commenters specifically vouch for others' experiences or express their own belief, pushing back against those who dismiss these accounts and supporting those who feel called crazy for what they saw or felt.
Let's take a moment to zoom in on a few specific anecdotes from the source thread that really stand out and exemplify these themes and descriptions. The Montego Bay lightning strike story is genuinely chilling. It feels like something out of a horror film.
Tell us about it.
The person is sitting on the beach late at night during a violent lightning storm, and they feel this intense, unnatural urge to run into the water. It intensifies until they just put their feet in the edge. The water starts bubbling unnaturally where they felt the draw strongest.
Bubbling.
Yeah, unnaturally. And they're overcome with an immediate sense of pure dread and danger, forcing them to pull back onto the sand. Then, a sudden bright bolt of lightning illuminates the sea, and for just a second, they see that big black figure with long hair staring at them from not too far away, just where the water was bubbling.
And them gone.
Gone the instant the light fades.
Wow. That account is so powerful because it combines the raw, overwhelming feeling of being called into danger with the brief, terrifying visual confirmation perceived during a moment of intense natural drama. The feeling of being specifically targeted or tried by the being is incredibly strong in that narrative.
The Rockport, Texas hidden beach story is also incredibly compelling because of the relative clarity of the sighting, even from a distance, and the internal conflict. Wading in the shallow water, feeling called, resisting the urge because of that strong sense of evil or danger, and then seeing the two heads pop up exactly where they felt called to swim. Describing them as looking human but knowing instantly they weren't because they appeared and disappeared completely out of nowhere and swam in a distinctly non-human way, like dolphins or fish, yet clearly had human-like heads.
And the conviction in that account is striking. They're real, 100%.
The cruise ship account, while not involving a physical sighting, is perhaps the most powerful because the overwhelming nature of the urge itself, disconnected from any immediate visual stimulus.
That feeling of being physically compelled to jump overboard from a cruise ship in the middle of the dark Gulf of Mexico at midnight, having to literally physically restrain yourself, your body moving towards the edge against your will, despite feeling an initial unsettling sense of peace.
It speaks volumes about the potential power of whatever phenomenon is behind the urge, regardless of whether a specific form is seen.
Absolutely. Then there's the Utila Honduras Remora story. It's different, involving a physical interaction that seems almost mundane at first glance, but becomes something else entirely.
How so?
Well, while just swimming normally near a dock, the swimmer feels a pulling sensation on their hair, causing panic. They get to the dock, and their friend pulls off a remora, those fish that cling to sharks.
Okay, yeah. Seems normal enough.
But the strangeness comes when the friend, who's a professional dive instructor, familiar with marine life, gets into the water where the interaction happened, and is immediately overcome by a feeling of being threatened by something she didn't know, something invisible and profoundly unsettling.
The dive instructor felt something weird, too.
Exactly. And the remore itself, which usually just clings passively, is described as pulling down and touching the swimmer's hair, legs, and arms, almost interacting actively. The dive instructor's reaction to an unseen threat adds a layer of mystery far beyond just a clingy fish.
That highlights the possibility of a more complex, perhaps even energetic or psychological phenomenon occurring alongside or in conjunction with reported sightings, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The sea and its creatures can be stranger than we often imagine.
The North Carolina River story is fascinating too, not least because it occurs in fresh water, not the ocean. The person is fishing alone with their dog, Josie. Their bobber gets pulled hard, and they feel drawn into a trance-like state following the line towards the water.
That trance again.
Yeah. Their dog, Josie, senses the danger, freaking out, barking, physically trying to stop them, even biting their leg to break the trance, but they kept following the pull, seemingly hypnotized.
The dog knew something was wrong.
Totally. Later, Josie is found hurt, with part of her ear gone and a mysterious tooth extracted from her skull that the vet initially thought was an alligator tooth, but the owner was convinced it wasn't, believing it was something else entirely.
A tooth? From what?
They don't know. That feeling of being drawn in a trance, the dog's desperate reaction, the mysterious injury, and the strange tooth, it all points to something profoundly disturbing and beyond a normal fishing mishap.
The hypnotic or trance-like effect mentioned there is a recurring element in siren and mermaid mythology across cultures, the power to lure, charm, or compel people towards the water, often to their doom.
And the dog's injury, a concrete physical element linked to the event, adds a disturbing anchor to a story that otherwise relies on subjective feeling and perception. It suggests the encounter wasn't just in the person's mind.
Definitely makes it harder to dismiss.
The Flatbridge, Jamaica sightings are particularly notable because multiple people in the thread from different backgrounds mention this specific location and the local legends associated with it. One account is from a tourist seeing a red-haired, very dark-skinned, fishy woman with dark eyes resting on a stone, getting scared, screaming, and being told by locals that mermaids exist there and warning not to get too close. Another account from someone familiar with the area mentions a merman seen on a rock at the same location, making eye contact and reinforcing the local story that they sacrifice humans.
That brings in a darker, more traditional folklore element that aligns with the danger motif reported in many other modern anecdotal accounts. It illustrates how deeply embedded local legends can shape, or perhaps reflect, the interpretation of strange sightings in certain areas. The idea of sacrifice adds a particularly grim dimension.
And then there is that profoundly distressing account shared in the thread, which describes not just a sighting or an urge, but an actual terrifying interaction.
Oh.
Being captured, held for 5 nights on a remote beach, being shown fish people, men described as potential husbands, and being beaten up, threatened with a bone spear, and assaulted and used like a specimen.
Good grief. That's horrific.
The account talks about being let go after some form of ritual and negotiation, but emphasizes carrying the immense trauma and the chilling warning to keep children away from certain waters because these beings don't want to be found or seen and are very dangerous.
That account is deeply disturbing and graphic, portraying a terrifying, violent, and utterly hostile interaction. While extreme compared to simple sightings, it aligns strongly with the recurrent danger theme reported by many others and presents a starkly different predatory image from the often romanticized mermaid of popular culture.
It also touches on themes of territoriality and aggression. They don't want to be found.
Right. And there's also the account shared by a fisherman's relative about a large fishtail with clear hands and a head attached that was caught in a net in the Atlantic in the 60s.
Caught in a net.
Yes. The being was described as frantically trying to escape, clearly not a known marine animal. They managed to release it, but the experience had a profound, tragic impact on the fisherman, who reportedly lost his mind shortly after and became an alcoholic, eventually passing away.
That speaks to the potentially traumatic psychological impact of such encounters. Not just the immediate physical danger, it echoes ancient tales of fishermen interacting with powerful or otherworldly sea creatures, sometimes with dire, life-altering consequences.
The sheer strangeness and the stress of the event seems to have broken him. It's deeply unsettling.
One more sighting worth detailing from the thread, because it's so specific and different, is the account from World War II involving Japanese soldiers on the K Islands in Indonesia.
Okay, what do they report?
They reported seeing strange creatures, described as around 150 centimeters tall, about 5 feet, with pink or grayish skin, prominent spines on their heads, 2 arms and 2 legs, distinctly no tails and mouths, like a carpfish.
Legs, not tails. And cart mouths.
Exactly. They were seen near beaches and lagoons, sometimes swimming with a human breaststroke. One soldier reportedly mistook one on a beach for a child from behind until he saw its face and realized it wasn't human, watching it then quickly run into the water.
Wow. This ties into local knowledge as well, apparently. The locals on the Kai Islands reportedly knew these creatures as orang ikan, which translates literally to manfish. A compelling detail is that one dead creature was later reportedly viewed by a sergeant.
And what did he describe?
He described it as around 160 centimeters long, about 5'3", with reddish-brown hair, spines on its neck, an ugly face that seemed to have a mixture of human-like and ape-like features, a low, short nose, a broad forehead, small ears, and a wide, lipless, carp-like mouth filled with tiny needle teeth. Its fingers and toes were described as long and webbed, and its body covered in algae.
That is a remarkably specific and detailed description and utterly distinct from the romanticized mermaid ideal. No tail, pinkish-gray pale skin, webbed hands and feet, spines, and a distinctly ugly fish-like mouth.
It aligns more with the commenter who mentioned Ogod's nomos, or ugly water creatures, suggesting potentially different categories of alleged aquatic humanoids. The detail about the carp-like mouth and needle teeth is particularly unsettling.
And there's another account from the thread mentioning a book describing a fisherman in the same region who allegedly caught several of these mermaids, including a child.
Caught them.
Apparently. This account describes them as having pinkish skin, yellow whiskers, a feline-like face, black hair, human size, and importantly, legs, not a tail. The child was described as crying and begging to be released.
Oh, that's awful.
And the fisherman's motive for keeping them was the perceived value of mermaid oil, which was rumored to have legendary properties.
That adds a potentially dark, pragmatic motive for capturing such creatures' perceived commercial or medicinal value. It's disturbing, but grounds the potential encounter in a very human drive: greed and exploitation.
So, thinking about all these varied modern stories, the polls, the sightings, the disturbing interactions, the different descriptions from across the globe, why are they so compelling? Why do they stick with you, the listener, when you read or hear them?
Is it the inherent mystery of the ocean itself, which remains largely unexplored, a vast unknown? The human desire for something extraordinary, for the unexplained, to exist and break through the mundane?
I think it's deeply rooted in ancient fears and fascinations about what might be lurking just out of sight, just below that opaque surface. The sea is still a frontier in so many ways, scientifically and geographically.
Absolutely.
These stories tap into that sense of the unknown frontier, the vulnerability of being alone by the water, the suddenness of these encounters. They challenge our understanding of what's possible.
Indeed. And this brings us to a very different type of story from your sources. A documented historical event that highlights the very real, tangible dangers and profound human drama that has unfolded on the sea throughout history.
Okay, let's shift gears dramatically now from modern anecdotes and unsettling speculation to the documented, factual history of the HMS Bounty and its infamous, world-renowned mutiny.
A true sea adventure, absolutely, but one defined by human conflict, survival against incredible odds, and the brutal consequences of life at sea. The HMS Bounty wasn't originally built as a warship. It was a collier, designed simply for transporting coal.
Right. Pretty humble beginnings.
It was relatively small for a warship of the era, measuring about 91 feet long, 25 feet wide, and registered at 230 tons.
So not a large, formidable vessel by any means. The Royal Navy purchased it in 1787 for a very specific, non-military mission, and it was commanded by a Lieutenant William Bligh.
And a key detail mentioned in the source, and a crucial factor in later events, is that as a cutter, the smallest category of warship at the time, it notably lacked a detachment of Royal Marines.
Ah, the Marines, usually the enforcers, right?
Exactly. Marines were the usual naval force used to maintain internal discipline, enforce authority, and prevent mutiny on larger ships. Their absence meant Bligh relied solely on his officers and loyal crew to maintain order.
Which, as we'll see, didn't quite work out.
No. This absence of an armed separate authority would prove absolutely crucial. The Bounty's mission, despite its humble origins, was an ambitious and scientifically significant one: to transport breadfruit plants from Tahiti, where they grew in abundance, all the way to the British West Indies.
Why breadfruit?
They were intended as a cheap, nutritious food source for enslaved laborers on plantations there.
Right, okay. The voyage to Tahiti was a long and arduous one. I mean, sailing around South America, the difficult passage around Cape Horn proving impossible, forcing Bligh to turn east.
And sail across the entire South Atlantic, around the Cape of Good Hope, across the Indian Ocean, and then across the vast Pacific. It ended up being over 27,000 nautical miles just to reach Tahiti.
Wow. It's a long time stuck on a small ship.
And during that incredibly long journey, tensions started to grow significantly on board, particularly between Bligh and his crew, and most notably with the acting lieutenant Fletcher Christian, who was second in command.
What was Bligh's command style like?
The source details it, describing it as verbally harsh, prone to intense rages directed particularly at his officers, often for perceived incompetence or mistakes. He had a sharp tongue and was known for public dressing downs.
Not great for morale.
No. However, it's also important to note that the source highlights his overall flogging rate was relatively low for the time compared to other captains, so his harshness manifested more through verbal abuse and humiliation than, say, constant physical punishment.
But that public humiliation, especially when directed at an officer like Christian, seems to have been a deeply significant factor, breeding resentment.
Oh, definitely. The source mentions several specific incidents that contributed to the deteriorating relationship and the simmering discontent. There was a notable conflict with the ship's master, John Fryer, over signing account books, where Bligh publicly read the articles of war to the crew, basically forcing Fryer to back down and humiliating him in front of the men.
Undermining his authority.
Precisely. There was also the death of the ship's surgeon, Thomas Huggin, attributed by Bligh to intemperance and indolence. Earlier, Huggin had made a false report about a seaman dying from scurvy when it was actually from a blood infection following a botched bloodletting.
Oh, dear.
This incident led Bligh to distrust the surgeon and take medical matters into his own hands, implementing his own remedies for the entire crew's health.
And then there was a desertion attempt by 3 crew members, Charles Churchill, William Muspratt, and John Millward, while the ship was anchored in Tahiti earlier in the voyage.
They tried to jump ship.
Yeah. They were later captured, brought back, and severely flogged. The source mentions that Bligh was intensely suspicious and even initially listed Christian's name on a list of potential accomplices he suspected, though he later dismissed that particular suspicion. The distrust was clearly widespread.
But perhaps the single most crucial factor leading directly up to the mutiny was the exceptionally long 5-month layover the crew experienced in Tahiti while the breadfruit saplings were being collected and potted.
5 months. That's a long time.
A very long time. The men lived ashore during this extended period, formed deep relationships with the native Polynesians, became accustomed to a different, more relaxed way of life, and were predictably far less amenable to snapping back to the strict, harsh discipline of naval life aboard a cramped ship upon departure.
I can imagine. Living in what must have felt like paradise for 5 months, forging bonds, experiencing freedom from the rigid hierarchy and constant tension of the ship. And then being expected to immediately revert to that strict, potentially abusive environment under Bligh's command must have been incredibly difficult, even jarring for the crew.
That jarring transition back to sea, combined with the existing long simmering tensions, Bligh's volatile temper, and Christian's documented history of public humiliation by Bligh, created a dangerously volatile situation, and it erupted with swift violence and decisive action on the morning of April 28, 1789.
The mutiny itself. Fletcher Christian, driven to desperation after another perceived public insult, rallied a group of disaffected crewmen. They seized control of the ship in a surprise action, overwhelming the few who resisted or remained loyal to Bligh.
Their immediate action was to remove Bligh as a threat and prevent any challenge to their control. Their method was brutal, but effective. They forced Bligh and 18 crew members who remained loyal into the ship's open launch.
The launch. Like a lifeboat.
A small boat designed for shore excursions, really not long-distance voyages. These loyalists were put adrift with minimal resources.
How minimal?
The provisions loaded into the launch were meager, as detailed in the source, clearly not intended for a long-term survival voyage. Bligh recorded they had about 150 pounds of bread, a mere 20 pounds of pork, a few coconuts and breadfruit salvaged from a brief, dangerous stop at Tofua.
Just scraps, basically.
Right. Only 28 gallons of water, the ship's Carpenter Purcell's tool chest, which proved invaluable for repairs, 3 bottles of wine, and 5 quarts of rum. That's it for 19 men cast adrift in the middle of the Pacific.
Incredible. What about navigation equipment?
There's even historical debate about that. Bligh claimed he was refused a sextant and the ship's timekeeper, chronometer, vital for determining longitude. However, the boatswain's mate, James Morrison, a loyalist who remained aboard the Bounty,
Why did he stay?
perhaps against his will, or maybe just lack of space in the launch, he later testified that Christian did give Bligh his personal sextant, stating it was sufficient for every purpose. While the ship's chronometer was left on the Bounty, Bligh did reportedly use Peckover's pocket watch for timekeeping.
So maybe not completely helpless, but still.
Still incredibly difficult, and regardless of the exact equipment, the physical state of the launch itself was perilous. With 19 men crammed in, it was dangerously low in the water, with only about 7 inches of freeboard.
7 inches between them and the ocean.
Just 7 inches of the boat's side above the waterline. Any significant wave could easily swamp and sink them. It was effectively a deliberate death sentence by drowning or exposure for the Loyalists, designed to eliminate any pursuit or challenge.
And how many were left on the Bounty?
25 men remained on the Bounty after the launch was cast off. This group was a mix. The committed mutineers who actively participated, but also several Loyalists who were either unable to get into the overloaded launch, detained against their will, or simply left behind because there wasn't space. Their fate would be different from Bligh's.
So Bligh and his loyalists were set adrift. Where did they head first?
Their immediate destination was the nearby volcanic island of Tofua, hoping to find supplies and potential help from the natives.
How did that go?
Badly. The encounter at Tofua proved fatal and underscored the dangers. Natives were initially friendly, trading with Bligh's men, but they quickly became numerous and menacing. As Bligh's men tried desperately to leave, pulling the overloaded launch back into the water, the natives attacked, seizing the stern rope to prevent their escape.
Oh, no.
The ship's quartermaster, John Norton, who was trying to free the rope, was tragically cornered and killed, stoned to death by the attackers.
Horrible. So Tofua was out.
Completely. After this brutal encounter, Bligh knew returning was impossible, and other nearby islands could be equally dangerous. They had to embark on what would become one of the most incredible voyages of survival in maritime history.
Bligh, using his exceptional navigational skills and leadership, guided the overloaded open launch over 3,500 nautical miles across the vast, largely uncharted Pacific to reach the Dutch colony of Timor in modern-day Indonesia.
It was an astonishing feat of seamanship, courage, and sheer endurance against starvation, exposure, and despair. Bligh, remarkably, managed to save some crucial documents from the Bounty, his journal and commission papers, but devastatingly lost his personal maps and charts.
15 years of work gone.
An immense personal and professional loss piled on top of the mutiny and the death of his men. Meanwhile, what happened to the 25 men who remained aboard the Bounty under Fletcher Christian's command?
Their fates were complicated and varied. Some, deciding against further seafaring life with Christian, chose to remain on Tahiti, taking their chances with life ashore and potential later discovery by the British Navy seeking the mutineers.
And the others? With Christian?
Others, notably Christian and a core group of mutineers, decided they needed to find a completely isolated, uncharted refuge to escape justice. They eventually, after searching, settled on the remote and tiny Pitcairn Island in 1790.
Pitcairn Island, famous because of them. Was life peaceful there?
Far from it, apparently, despite the initial hope for refuge. The source mentions a significant internal conflict and brutal killings among the small group of mutineers and the Polynesian men who had accompanied them from Tahiti, fueled by disputes over the Polynesian women and power struggles.
So, Paradise Lost again.
Pretty much. This violent period included the death of Fletcher Christian himself, reportedly killed in 1793, either by one of the Polynesian men seeking revenge or by fellow mutineers.
So who was left when they were eventually found?
By 1808, when the American sealing ship Topaz, commanded by Captain Mayhew Folger, unexpectedly stumbled upon Pitcairn Island.
A chance discovery.
Yeah, a startling discovery given its remote location. Only one of the original mutineers remained alive.
John Adams.
John Adams, what happened with him? The source details Adams's remarkable transformation. After the violent chaos subsided around 1800, Adams became the de facto leader and patriarch of the small, isolated community, taking responsibility for the remaining Polynesian women and the children who had been born on the island. He used the ship's Bible, saved from the Bounty, to teach them literacy and Christianity, establishing a religious and moral foundation for the burgeoning community.
From mutineer to patriarch.
Quite the turnaround. When Topaz arrived, John Adams readily admitted who he was and presented Captain Folger with tangible artifacts from the Bounty the ship's azimuth compass and chronometer, clear evidence of his identity and the ship's fate.
And did he face justice?
News eventually reached Britain years later, but due to the passage of time, his leadership of the community, and perhaps the remote nature of the island, John Adams was notably not prosecuted for mutiny.
And today, descendants of the Bounty mutineers and the Tahitians who accompanied them continue to live on Pitcairn Island, a living legacy of this dramatic true story of conflict, survival, isolation, and eventual redemption.
The Bounty story is just. It's a powerful, true historical account of survival against incredible odds, the brutal consequences of leadership failures and human conflict, and the harsh, unpredictable realities of isolation at sea.
It's a world away from folklore, isn't it? Grounded in documented fact, logbooks, and later trial records. It certainly makes you reflect on the contrast between these stark, documented facts of maritime history, where the dangers are brutal and very real, whether from human conflict, the elements, or starvation, and the sometimes hazy personal accounts of strange sightings we discussed earlier.
The danger on the Bounty was undeniably physically present, no question.
Exactly. And speaking of dangers and wonders that push the boundaries of reality, let's turn now to tales that venture even further into the realm of ancient legend, myth, and pure fantasy.
Right. We're setting sail now into legend, into the world of 1001 Nights, with the famous tales of Sinbad the Sailor. Let's introduce this legendary figure.
Sinbad the Sailor of Baghdad. A wealthy merchant, renowned for his seemingly inexhaustible fortune and magnificent entertainments. The source describes his wealth as something of a mystery to those around him, as he wasn't born into it, but rather acquired it through extraordinary means.
How did the stories come about?
The premise is that Sinbad the sailor, living a life of ease, hears the lamentations of a poor porter, also named Sinbad, Sinbad the landsman, who is struggling under a heavy load and questioning the injustice of their differing fortunes.
So Sinbad the Sailor invites him in.
Yes, and proceeds to tell him his life story, revealing that his fabulous wealth was not easily gained, but was the direct result of a series of perilous, strange adventures at sea, each beginning with the loss of all he possessed and ending with unexpected fortune gained through survival and ingenuity.
These tales are classic fantasy, full of encounters with the bizarre, the wondrous, and the terrifying. They represent the ancient world's imagination grappling with the unknown edges of the map.
Let's look at some specific voyages and encounters detailed in the source material. The first voyage introduces one of the most iconic creatures, the encounter on the island of the Ruck Egg.
The Ruck, the giant bird.
Exactly. Sinbad finds himself, as he often does, stranded on a seemingly uninhabited island. Exploring, he discovers this enormous, smooth, white, shining dome. It's described as being about 50 paces around with no door, no opening, just a perfect, immense curve.
What does he think it is?
He doesn't know at first. His curiosity and perhaps a bit of trepidation are piqued by this inexplicable structure. And then the sky darkens, not with clouds, but with the approach of something immense. He looks up and sees a great black shape swiftly approaching, blotting out the sun like a moving storm. This is the monstrous bird, the rook.
And he remembers the stories.
He immediately remembers stories told by travelers in Baghdad, tales of an immense mythical bird called the ruck, large enough, they said, to carry off elephants to feed its young.
That detail alone, a bird that preys on elephants, truly conveys the scale of the fantasy and the creature in these stories.
It really does. Sinbad then has the terrifying realization that the white dome he found is not a building, but the bird's egg described in the source as not the least of the creator's works for its immense size. He then watches the giant bird alight and brood on the egg before falling asleep, a creature of myth made horrifyingly real before his eyes.
It's a perfect example of how these myths blend elements of the known world. Large birds, maybe exaggerated traveler tales, with immense fantastical scale that defies reality, pushing the boundaries of the listener's imagination.
Another terrifying encounter comes on the fifth voyage, the island of the ogre. Shipwrecked again, Sinbad and his few surviving companions find what seems like a promising apartment or dwelling, thinking they've found shelter and safety.
But then, the ogre appears. Describe this creature from the source. It sounds nightmarish.
Oh, it is. It's described as being in the shape of a man, but monstrous and inhuman. Skin as black as coal, eyes that blaze like fire, two gleaming tusks protruding from its great mouth like a wild boar, enormous ears that droop down to its shoulders, and fingers ending in nails like the sharp claws of a beast of prey. A truly horrifying, cannibalistic giant.
Absolutely terrifying.
Oh.
And its intent is immediately clear and gruesome, right?
Immediately, it begins inspecting the captured men, feeling their limbs and bodies to see if they are fat enough to eat. By sheer chance, or perhaps divine intervention as Sinbad often attributes his survival, Sinbad is lean and wasted from his ordeal and is initially spared.
But someone else isn't so lucky.
No. The horror is made real when the ogre chooses the master of the ship, a big fat man, to be its first meal. The source describes the horrific scene as the ogre cooks and eats the master right in front of them, throwing the bones onto a heap, demonstrating the absolute powerlessness and terror of the survivors.
How do they escape?
The escape plan is desperate, gruesome, but ultimately clever, echoing other myths where cunning overcomes brute strength. While the ogre sleeps after its meal, Sinbad and the other survivors heat two sharp-pointed iron spits they find red hot in the fire and, working together, thrust them into the ogre's blazing eyes to blind him.
They blind the giant.
Yes, they succeed, and the ogre rises with a mighty roar that the source says shook the earth, bellowing in pain and blind rage. It searches for them, groping wildly for the door of the dwelling, and goes forth uttering loud cries of agony.
That motif of blinding a monstrous giant is notably present in other ancient mythologies, like Odysseus' encounter with the Cyclops Polyphemus in Greek legend.
It really is. It shows a recurring human theme in mythology and folklore across the world, confronting overwhelming, monstrous power not through superior strength, which the humans clearly lack, but through wit, cunning, and exploiting the creature's weaknesses.
Sinbad's fourth voyage brings another significant encounter, following yet another violent storm and shipwreck.
The source describes the terrifying power of the tempest increasing, the gale lashing the sea into fury, sails being torn away, masts blown down, and the vessel springing a leak and sinking rapidly.
He survives by clinging to a broad plank with others, drifting for day and night on the turbulent sea, described poetically as now descending into despairing hollows, and now flung up on the mountaintops of billows, a vivid image of the sea's power.
They are miraculously cast ashore on an island where they find sufficient fruit, herbs, and water to sustain themselves and survive. They are eventually discovered by a group of men and taken to their king, the king of Serendib.
And the description of the land of Serendib, believed by scholars to be based on historical descriptions of Sri Lanka, is one of immense splendor, wealth, and exoticism from the perspective of a traveler from Baghdad.
Right. It's called a well-conditioned, flourishing place, overflowing with an abundance of food and valuable merchandise from all corners of the world. Mountain streams are said to contain the richest jewels with rare minerals, and everywhere there are the fragrant odors of spices like clove, cinnamon, and pepper. Valuable stuff.
The source vividly describes the magnificence of the king's procession too, giving us a glimpse into the prestige, wealth, and power of distant rulers. His throne is carried on a gigantic elephant, surrounded by his courtiers. 1,000 other elephants follow, carrying princes and nobles.
10,000 horsemen clad in silk and gold ride behind, and before and behind the king are criers proclaiming his power and, paradoxically, his mortality.
And that is perhaps the most striking and philosophical part of the procession, described the crier behind the king constantly proclaiming, "Great is he, but he will die." Again, I say it, he will die.
A stark, public reminder of the inevitability of death amidst all that worldly wealth and temporal power. It grounds the fantasy in a universal truth.
The land itself is described with unique, almost magical environmental characteristics, suggesting its exoticism and distance. The day is said to be equally divided with the night the whole year round, with sudden transitions between light and darkness.
Yet, even after experiencing all this wonder, wealth, and hospitality, after gaining permission from the king to return home to Baghdad with valuable gifts and finally setting sail feeling safe, danger finds Sinbad again in a terrifying, unexpected form.
He just can't catch a break, can he?
It seems not. Near an island on the return journey, a fleet of boats puts off from the shore and surrounds their ship. The men in these boats are described not just as warriors or pirates, but specifically as looking more like demons than men, clad entirely in suits of mail armor, armed with swords and daggers.
Demons, like
Yep.
supernatural beings.
That's how they're described, giving them a supernatural, terrifying appearance. They attack the ship swiftly and brutally, slaying those who resist, taking the rest prisoner, towing the now captured ship to the island shore, and seizing all the valuable merchandise Sinbad was bringing back. Then they lead the survivors away to be sold as slaves.
A sudden, shocking end to a prosperous voyage, highlighting the constant, unpredictable dangers lurking even after escaping previous perils and believing you are safe.
This sequence emphasizes a core theme of Sinbad's tales and ancient sea travel narratives. The sea is inherently unpredictable and dangerous. Even after surviving monstrous creatures, violent storms, and hostile lands, a new terrifying threat can emerge at any moment, challenging your survival once again. It's a cycle of peril and escape.
Analyzing Sinbad's tales as a whole, we see that clear, powerful recurring pattern, don't we? It's a cycle of disaster, typically a shipwreck, followed by being stranded in an unknown, dangerous place, encountering strange, often terrifying creatures or peoples, surviving against incredible odds through wit, resourcefulness, and divine favor, eventually finding rescue or a way to continue the journey, often gaining wealth or knowledge in unexpected ways.
Returning home to Baghdad, living a life of luxury for a time, only to eventually, despite the previous hardships, set out again on another perilous voyage.
It's a narrative loop of ruin, survival, and renewal, driven by the fundamental human desires for trade, knowledge, wealth, or simply the irresistible call of adventure, and always punctuated by the unpredictable, often violent nature of the sea itself and the mysterious lands it connects.
The scale of the fantasy in Sinbad's tales is enormous and unrestrained compared to the modern anecdotal accounts we discussed earlier. Giant birds that eat elephants, one-eyed cannibal ogres, lands flowing with jewels and spices, warriors who look like mail-clad demons.
How do these compare conceptually to the descriptions in the Reddit thread? The black figures, the fishy women, the orangutan with carp mouths and legs.
Well, the modern accounts, even at their strangest, are generally more limited in scope and closer to variations of human or recognizable animal forms, albeit strange and unexplained ones. Sinbad's tales are unbound by such constraints, reflecting the limitless imagination of ancient storytelling, a time when the vast majority of the world was unknown and could easily be populated with fantastical wonders and horrors.
They perhaps represent the perceived scale of the truly unknown world to ancient mariners venturing beyond familiar shores.
Exactly. And the mystery of Sinbad's wealth. The stories explicitly tell us it didn't come from simple, safe trade voyages like other merchants. His fortune is a direct consequence of surviving these incredible, life-threatening adventures, finding immense value whether in jewels, rare commodities, or salvaged goods in unexpected places after facing the literal terrors of the deep and the distant unknown lands.
His wealth is the tangible reward for confronting and surviving the ultimate unknown, a prize earned through immense suffering and risk. It's a powerful justification within the narrative for his later life of luxury.
Absolutely.
Bringing all these threads together, now, the unsettling, often fear-filled modern personal anecdotes of potential encounters, the stark, documented history of the Bounty Mutiny and its brutal aftermath, and the ancient myths of Sinbad the Sailor. What does it all ultimately tell us about our relationship with the sea?
They all, in their vastly different forms and from their unique perspectives across centuries, speak to the enduring, powerful, and profoundly unpredictable nature of the ocean, and the complex ways humanity responds to its inherent mysteries, its potential for wonder, and its very real dangers.
We've seen raw, sometimes fear-filled accounts of potential modern encounters that feel incredibly personal and immediate, raising unsettling questions about what might truly be in our waters today. We've explored a true story of human conflict, survival against both nature and human nature, and the brutal consequences of leadership and isolation, highlighting the very real physical dangers sailors have always faced throughout history.
And we've reveled in ancient myths that personify the sea's power and mystery through fantastical creatures and unbelievable journeys, reflecting a worldview where the line between reality and legend was far more blurred.
The interplay between documented reality, personal anecdote, and ancient myth is truly fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Does historical fact shape how we interpret strange sightings today, perhaps making us wary of the unknown?
Do ancient myths provide a cultural framework or archetypes for understanding modern unexplained phenomena, even if the details differ? Is there a kernel of truth embedded in some of these legends or anecdotes, or is it purely the projection of human imagination onto the blank canvas of the unknown deep?
The Reddit thread we started with specifically touched on this idea, speculating about non-human intelligence existing beneath large water bodies. These sources, spanning centuries and genres, certainly highlight how much of the ocean remains unexplored, unmapped, and unknown to us.
That vastness and depth of the sea leave ample room, not only for scientific discovery of countless unknown species and geological phenomena, but also for fantastical speculation and the enduring persistence of legends. Both the modern anecdotes and the ancient myths vividly populate that unexplored space with wonders and terrors, reflecting our hopes, our fears, and our persistent curiosity.
These stories, old and new, legendary and purportedly real, remind us that the sea isn't just a body of water covering most of our planet. It's a frontier, a place where the known meets the unknown, where the rationale can dissolve into the inexplicable.
And where extraordinary things, for better or often for worse, can happen, challenging our understanding of the world and our place within its profound mysteries.
They reflect a deep-seated human fascination with what lies beyond the visible horizon and beneath the opaque surface, a fascination with the possibility of something else existing, something powerful and perhaps intelligent.
A fascination that seems as strong today as it was in the time of ancient mariners setting sail into the unknown.
We've navigated personal claims of strange aquatic encounters, recounted the dramatic, brutal history of the Bounty Mutiny and its aftermath, and sailed through the legendary, fantastical adventures of Sinbad the Sailor.
It's been quite a journey, touching on fear, survival, wonder, and the endless compelling mystery of the deep.
Thank you for sharing these incredible sources and joining us on this deep dive. From ancient sailors dreaming of monstrous birds and cannibal ogres lurking beyond the map, to modern observers reporting strange figures in coastal waters and unsettling compulsions drawing them into the waves, the human imagination has always populated the ocean with both wonders and profound terrors. What does this enduring fascination tell us about our own deep-seated relationship with the mysteries that lie beneath the waves, and perhaps the mysteries within ourselves when faced with the unknown?